Welcome to Towards the Storm, where we navigate through the turbulent waters of business, Bitcoin, and all the other BS that comes with it. Give it up for your host, Thomas Gaffney. He is here to help you stay ahead of the curve in the ever-changing world of finance and technology. Each week, we'll dive into the latest news, trends, and insights from industry experts to help you make sense of the chaos and come out on top. So buckle up, because we're heading straight into the storm.
Today, I have with me a wonderful guest. I've been wanting to talk to him for a while. He's a really cool guy. His name is Mike Vedetto. He is from the project Astrolescent, building on the Radix protocol. Let's give everyone a round of applause. And Mike, super excited to have you on the show today. Thanks for coming by. How's it going, man? Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Astrolescent kind of started out as like an idea between like me and my friends.
Okay.
They all really love Radix. They think it's probably the best layer one out there right now.
Agreed.
They think it has a lot of potential. So we were talking about like different ways that we could kind of facilitate the growth of the network. And we basically came up with like 4 different financial products that we could release to the public that would help onboard users from crypto and Web3, but also from traditional finance as well, because that's really where the pie is that most people just use traditional finance and they never get into Web3.
Mm-hmm.
So the first 2 products were the decentralized exchange aggregator and then the USDA stablecoin.
Cool.
And by having a fiat on off ramp, you could trade from fiat into any token on Radix seamlessly.
Exactly. That's cool.
So the whole design of the 4 products is that they work symbiotically together. So we don't want to release the next 2 just yet, but I can tell you that they're great products. But there's a lot of development that still needs to go on to get to that point. So we're very excited here. So a little bit about myself. So I'm an electrical engineer.
Cool.
I did my undergrad at University of Delaware. I got my BS in physics, and then I got my master's in electrical engineering. So I have a little bit of a diverse background. I have a little bit of a diverse background in STEM. So I work professionally as a RF engineer, which is a subclass of electrical engineering.
Amazing. That's really cool.
And I do a lot of mixed signal designs for printed circuit boards that go into radar systems. So I do analog, digital, high frequency, mostly a lot of RF structure analysis with 3D modeling. And it's certainly an interesting job, and it's built my technical background so well that I can go into, learning different types of software languages pretty quickly.
Cool. That's awesome.
So I'm pretty, well versed in TypeScript, JavaScript. I've been picking up Rust and Scripto now. I wrote all the contracts for our platform.
I like it.
C++, Java,
basically full stack dev,
MATLAB, Python. I have a little bit of everything.
Some magician pulling the string. I like it. That's awesome. So technical background. So electrical engineer. That's pretty sophisticated, right? Most people don't know the difference between a switch and an outlet plug.
Sure.
So that's pretty impressive. So what brings you to Radix? What brings you to Web3? How'd you get in that space? How's that going on?
So my friend introduced me to Bitcoin back in 2013. And he was like, there's this new type of digital currency out there. And I was like, what? I didn't know about it. So I started doing a lot of research about it. I was like, I think this is really the future, like right here. We're living it. So I bought my first Bitcoin back in 2013, summer 2013, and by the winter of 2013, I started researching about Radix, and that's how I got introduced. Well, at the time it was eMoney, right? But now it's Radix. Mm-hmm. And I started talking to Dan, and the conversations that we had and that were on the forums at the time was that Bitcoin just wasn't scalable, wasn't the end game solution. It was a great starting point, but you needed another type of technology that could do the millions of transactions a second, that could, he came up with sharding later, but it could shard and distribute that load across a network that's decentralized. And the ideas that he was talking about in 2013 were so far ahead of where the technology was that I was like, this is the future, and I've been following Radix ever since.
Wow.
More active in the community.
OG. You're pretty Radix. You're eMoney, man. That's crazy.
Yeah, and I've been following it ever since. Not as active in the community until recently, when I had launched Astrolescent and really started making a name for myself as Miranim on Telegram, and now Michael Vedetto.
Nice. I like it, man. That's the way to do it. Building some trust up there. That's what a lot of people are kind of worried now. I mean, I get that a lot of people entered DeFi, not just DeFi, but crypto in general, just because of the anonymous aspect of it. And now people are, now that regulations coming around, you can't really hide behind your avatar anymore, right? And so it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, right? But I think it's a good thing, especially in finance. People need to know who they're trusting. Yep. So putting a face to who's building these products and creating accountability, I think it's huge. I'm a huge doxing proponent. Yeah. Right? I doxed myself from the second I walked onto the scene and was just like, yo, I'm Thomas Gaffney. I'm going to try and do stuff. Let's make it happen. If I fail, I'll be the first one to admit it. You know what I mean? And so it's had its pitfalls and it's had its benefits. Because you will get people that go after you because of you actually putting your name out there. You only get one shot to me, Mike Vedetto. You could make 1,000 Miriam. What is it? How do you say it again? Miranim? Miranim. You could be 1,000 Miranims, right? But you only get one shot at being Mike Vedetto. And so I think that's awesome. I think it's a huge step forward. I think it's very important for Radix, very important for Astrolescent in terms of gaining trust within the community. But it's perfect, man. So now we kind of know a little bit who you are, what you're doing. Tell us a little about Astrolescent, the stablecoin. Like, I'm super jazzed about this. I think that having a stablecoin is one of the most important things for a DeFi protocol. You can't have a massive scalable DeFi protocol that everyone's going to use if you don't have a stablecoin. So tell us a little bit about that, because I'm super pumped.
Yeah, so we always wanted to do a stablecoin, right? But it's like, how do you do a stable coin with all of the regulations and compliance without seed funding? Mm-hmm. You can't do an algorithmic one because that'll get labeled as a security in the US. Mm-hmm. So what you could do is create an entity internationally and prevent users from the US by using it. But that's more difficult and they have to go through KYC anyway, right? Uh-huh. You could do an over-collateralized one like DAI, but that's
I understand what you're saying, over-collateralized. What do you mean by that? Because you said USDA is a collateralized stablecoin. What exactly is a collateralized stablecoin so that the people moving forward know what we're even talking about?
So there's two types of collateralized stablecoins. One is a fiat-backed, where it's backed 1-to-1 at a minimum of US dollars to US tokenized dollars on network. Okay. So there's a bank account that's at a registered custodian that, like, let's say you come in and you want to mint 1 token on network of USDA. You will put $1 into our registered custodian account, okay, and we will mint $1 to your Web3 address on Radix. And then you are free to do whatever you want with that token. You can provide liquidity, you can make trades with it, you can hold it, and it'll always provide a stable value because there's always at least $1 backing that token in a custody account. Now, the second type of collateralized stablecoin would be an over-collateralized crypto-based one, where you have, let's say, you have 1 Bitcoin backing something, and Bitcoin's valued at 20,000. So you would issue $5,000 worth of a stable coin. So it's over collateralized by like 400% in that case, right? So unless Bitcoin were to go below 5,000, you have enough collateral to back those outstanding tokens on network.
Okay.
They're not as capital efficient because you don't get the one-to-one. You have to put more in than you get out on network.
That makes sense.
So that's the problem with the over-collateralized stable coins.
Okay.
So
you're building a collateralized stablecoin, correct?
Right. A fiat-backed collateralized stablecoin.
Perfect. I think that helps moving forward for the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you want to burn it, you would essentially do the same steps in reverse. You would send $1 to one of our addresses, where we would wait until we clear a withdrawal to your bank account. Mm-hmm. And then once that withdrawal clears, we burn that one token, and now the supply has shrunk on network.
Okay, cool. So what promulgated you guys to build this? How's it going to work? Right now in this regulatory environment, everyone's scared, right? Look at SBV, right? Just bottom fell out because they were buying government-backed bonds that are supposed to be a safe investment, and they got a liquidity crunch because the value of the bonds dropped and they could not pay their debtors, right? Their debitors. And so classic bank run and SBV, and there's starting to be some huge fallout with USDC and potential depeg of the tokens. What's going on with that? Like how do you pitch yourself in a world with that environment when people are scared?
So it's really interesting you bring that up because it's at the forefront of the news right now. You can't look at any news in crypto and not see it, right? I mean, it's all over the place. So it's a really interesting thing, right? The Silicon Valley Bank, they went out and they took all these deposits from users, right? And in the low interest environments that were in, the 2020 since COVID, right? You couldn't really get a lot of yield on your investments. No. So they bought mortgage-backed securities, as you were saying, and they were yielding like 1.5%. And they were long-term bonds, and that's really the critical issue here, is that they're long-term bonds. So what happens is when the Federal Reserve wants to come in to stifle inflation, they're going to raise the federal rates. And initially, during COVID, they were between 0.25 point, which is basically zero for all intents and purposes. Yeah. But as they start raising that rate, the face value of those mortgage-backed securities goes down. Okay. And as they raise the rate more and more and more, the value goes down and down and down. So what happened to Silicon Valley Bank is that they started seeing that they didn't have enough money to cover all the deposits in the bank. So what they did was they said, oh, let's sell some, take the loss on it. And then as they started selling, it was like a negative feedback loop where they kept losing more money. And then they're like, oh, we need to raise money.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And then that's when everybody got really scared and everybody really pulled out, because then it's like a bank that it's got $210 billion in assets. How are they out of money?
Yeah. So, oh my God. It's crazy.
So what we're doing here is to start for the initial go live. Astrolescent is just doing custody deposits with our registered custodian. So it's $1 in, $1 out. We're not doing anything with those dollars. They're just sitting in a custody account.
Losing to inflation, right?
Yeah, losing to inflation, right? But at least it's always worth $1.
Hey, at least it's always worth $1. And that's important. That's why it's really important. That's why you need a stable coin, because it's stable and you can do it. So keep going.
But in the future, we'd like to take a portion of that and invest in very short-term U.S. Treasuries, which are basically cash equivalents. So we would be buying 0 to 3 month Treasury ETFs that are immediately redeemable. So if there was ever a bank run on USDA and people pulled out 50% in a couple of days, right? We could always get that money back immediately to the investors, and it wouldn't be a problem.
That's great.
So there's no chance really of a depegging. But if you want to talk about risk, which is a good thing to talk about, because there are always risks no matter what you do in finance, right? let's talk about some of the risks of USDA. Well, the first risk, which is with anything in crypto, is if they get our private keys, we're in trouble. But we are going to put in some safeguards built into the smart contract logic to help prevent that. I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't want to give people ideas, but
absolutely,
we're going to put some protection in there. In the case of that, we might take a small loss, but it's better than having an infinite mint happen, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to build in some protections like that.
Cool.
And then there are other risks as well. Our registered custodian, if they were to have issues and they had liquidity crisis themselves, that could cause an issue for USDA as well. Mm-hmm. The fact that they're getting the charter license in New York is huge.
Okay.
Because the trust charter license forces them to do all these types of compliance and regulation that they wouldn't normally have to do.
Okay.
Because there are so many things that they could do behind the scenes, like what happened at FTX when they were taking customer funds and investing them in, risky assets. They can't do things like that because there are every few months they have like a continuous open communication with DFS, which is the Department of Financial Services in New York, and they are constantly auditing them on a continuous basis. So they can't really do any of the illegal things that have plagued the Web3 crypto space over the past year. Right?
Yeah, because that was all the things that these people were doing was in a time of easy money. You know what I mean? So they had all this, they were making crazy amounts of money and they were doing all these cool things and putting in all these risky assets. And when they were losing, it didn't really matter because you got interest rates at 0, right? So you could just go borrow more money, and then try and make more money to cover your losses, right? But as those interest rates go up, right, and you say the value of like the bonds go down, it is harder to borrow money. There's less VC capital out there to be raised, right? Like if Silicon Valley Bank was able to raise money, it would have been fine. And 2 years ago, they probably could have, but it's not that environment anymore, And so it's kind of crazy. And so in comparison, let's talk about USDC, right? So how is their structure working and why are they potentially in trouble? And how is that different from USDA?
So USDC is issued by Circle.
Okay.
And Circle has all of their deposits at a variety of different banks. Okay. Maybe like 7 or 8 banks. I'm not exactly sure how many, but 2 of those banks were Silvergate and Silicon Valley Bank.
That's not...
So I think they had like around 3.3 billion at Silicon Valley Bank, and they tried to do a wire to withdraw it, and it didn't go through. So I don't know what's going to happen with that, but that will get baked into the price of USDC if there's a bank run, right? There's only 90 cents to every dollar outstanding. It should be worth 90 cents to the dollar.
How do you fix that? Is there a way to fix it, or will it always just be 90 cents now? Or is it going to go to 0 because everyone's going to pull their funds? Like, how does that work? You know what I mean? Because if they have the same liquidity issue, the depegging could keep going even worse, right? Kind of like what we saw with Terra and Luna.
It could, but a piece of it is that as long as there's a certain amount of funds backing it, there really is a limit to how low it can go, unless additional banks start defaulting. Like some of the other 7 banks start going out, it could keep going down. So that is possible, right? Mm-hmm. But how did they get out of this situation? There is a couple ways.
Okay.
One is that they are making money, so they could make back that deficit over a long period of time and pay back the users. And that would probably take a couple of years at least, right? Mm-hmm. But what I think is most likely going to happen is that the U.S. government is going to step in and bail out SVB because they're too big to fail. Yeah. And we don't need another 2008 crisis on our hands.
No, we don't.
So I think the most likely scenario is they come in, they guarantee all of the deposits, Circle gets their 3.3 billion, and we move on.
That would be ideal. I mean, considering we just bailed out not bailed out. Consider we just gave away what, like $3.8 trillion during the pandemic, and half of that got stolen by random companies and people. I think we can afford another $200 billion to stave off a complete collapse of the financial system again, because it would be very bad. You know what I mean? Like, people wouldn't like that. Systemic risk, they say. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of crazy. Jeez. So how does that look, right? Like, some of these people are just, this is why Bitcoin was created, right? Was this exact purpose, was that banks are too big to fail, right? And now we've got people in crypto saying, yo, SBV is too big to fail. We don't want them to fail because it fucks everyone else. You know what I mean? Like, that's not good, right? So how have we gone from, we made Bitcoin so the everyday person could do it and we don't need the government? We need the government. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like we've gone back in a circle. No pun intended, as a Carver joke, but
I see what you mean. I like it.
But so, like, many years ago, like when banks first started, the banks are under collateralized, where they loan out and they have fractional reserves, right? So like for every dollar they loan out, they only keep like 20 cents on hand or something like that, right? And banks were doing illegal things. So like the reason these laws were created and regulations were created was because somebody got away with it at some point. And they cracked down on it. That's what happened. That's what happened in 2008. And that's why they came out with Frank Dodd. Like that, like the stress test that these banks have to go through for the big ones, right? The big ones.
And the stress test is just to see what the financial assets are in a case of a liquidity crunch and a financial downturn. And so that's just what that is.
Right. And you couldn't even imagine the compliance that goes into something like that, and the risk management for these big banks. It's insane.
It is. It costs a lot of money. It keeps me working, right? Us lawyers, pays our bills, puts food on the table. Yeah, more red tape. Yeah, if you want to do something, call me. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah. Oh man, but that's funny. It is crazy how we have gone in a circle like this. Because I mean, I remember the 2008 crisis. Wasn't really impacted by it as much because I was still in school, but the fallout, looking back, I'm a huge history buff. I'm the kind of person that's like, yo, you can predict the future if you study history. Study history. History repeats itself. So if you study history, you can predict the future, right? And so liquidity crunch with the mortgage-backed securities, it's starting to come back around again. All these low interest rates environments, I feel like it's almost like this hyper thing that's just constantly going back and forth. This is not something new, right? Like back in the day, like crypto is basically just essentially, I don't want to say this, but essentially a new stock market. But back in 1920s with the Great Depression and the first real great American stock market crash, they were doing all this crazy stuff too and getting away with scams and doing all these things, right? It's just, crypto is just a new asset category that has been created through blockchain and smart contracts, right? And so, and it could potentially be a safer one, right? Where you have less systemic risk and less counterparty risk because of the way smart contracts are implemented, and everything's on the chain. You can see what these assets are doing and what people are doing with them, right? So, but when you're intermingling with traditional finance, aka like SPV, right? That's how you got to have fiat onboarded to crypto. It needs to happen, right? And so it's kind of crazy because it's like people are like, well, why don't the banks just keep it one for one forever? It's because you can't make money. You can't grow. What's the way to grow? You lend out more money than you have and borrow more money. And so like that is how our economy is based. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. And so like I think banks are necessary, but at the same time, very dangerous. It's like you said, like any risk, any financial investment comes with risk, no matter what. And that includes government bonds these days.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that sums it up pretty well, I would say. Absolutely. Like you said, it's just a new asset class that's a completely new wave of technology. It's like, when the internet came out and everyone was making all these .com sites in the 90s, there were tons of scams. There were people scamming credit cards left and right.
Tons.
People forget about like how Wild West it was back then,
Yeah,
in the
it was.
90s. It was nuts.
It was nuts.
So the same thing, in the 2000s when it all crashed down, it's very similar in the Web3 space, and it's going through growing pains, and that's really what we're seeing. We're seeing the growing pains. Regulators got to come in, they got to regulate it, they got to make it safe for users, because at the end of the day, it's about protecting customer assets, because you don't want SBF to come in and steal $10 billion and he ends up in the Cayman Islands. That's just not going to fly.
This motherfucker.
Yeah.
Screwed us all over, you know what I mean? Send us back in decade. Oh my God, dude. I remember watching that. It's just like watching it go down, watching Terra and Luna depeg. I was like, oh my God. And then crypto survived that. I was like, okay, all right, we're good. Watching SBF go down, I'm like, oh my God. Watching crypto survive that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now it's like SBV, USDC. No, please, not again. You're destroying my life. You know what I mean? And so it's like there's these macroeconomic factors, right? The war, everyone knows about.
Yeah.
Inflation, everyone knows about. COVID, everyone knows about. Freaking China, spy balloons, everyone knows about. Like, there's a lot going on, right? And so in this environment, you are trying to navigate this and build something that people are very scared of right now. And so, and I know you explained it a little bit earlier, but explain why they shouldn't be scared, why they shouldn't be afraid to use USDA, in a sense that it's like, hey, I mean, they're doing this thing. We're going to do it this way. Like, because it's needed, right? You need a stable coin to be able to interact, because people who are using large transactions need something that is not going to fluctuate in value. So there's time to escrow, due diligence, all that jazz. There's a stable coin that's needed. So what are you doing differently that is going to try and stave off from these guys?
Yeah, so that just goes back to making sure that our partner has the proper licenses and we do our due diligence in making sure that they're not going to have the same risks that Silicon Valley Bank does or Silvergate does. And if we do our due diligence for them and they do their due diligence for us and our flow of funds, I think the relationship will be very safe for our users. And ultimately, it'll probably be a very prosperous relationship for an indefinite period of time, right?
Yeah.
But you did say something that I just wanted to go back to for 1 second.
Let's go.
So if you want to talk about like how we got into this situation, right?
Okay. Yeah.
This is something that I like discussing and educating the viewers on really how we got here, right?
Let's go. This is what the people want.
So in 2020, early 2020, the Federal Reserve rates were in the 3% range, I think. If my memory serves me right? COVID hit, and a lot of companies got really scared. So they just immediately dropped rates, right, down to zero.
Zero. It's over. Yeah.
A lot of people lost their jobs, but it was like a V-shaped recovery. It came back very quickly because the government stimulated like immediately.
Yeah.
They pumped all this money in. Mm-hmm. So the thing is, the velocity of money went down considerably, like 33%. So they had to pump M2 up roughly by 33%. And M2 is roughly a gauge of how much money is out there in the system at any time. Roughly.
Is that like a rating? Is there like M2 is like a tracker or something?
Yeah, if you go to the Federal Reserve and you look up M2, you can see what the graph is like over 40 or 50 years, and you can see how the money supply changes.
Okay, wow, that's really cool. I didn't even know that. That's awesome.
And you could look at the velocity money. They have a whole. You can even look at the Bitcoin price on the Federal Reserve, which is pretty funny too.
That is funny. I mean, they know it's real. They know they're because they want to keep control and they don't want to go crazy because they're accumulating their Bitcoin as well.
Right. So if you look at M2, they bumped it up very quickly to get that V-shaped recovery, which I agree with. It needed to be done, or we could have had a.
It could have been disastrous.
Right. I'm fine with that. Sure. So as the economy starts to recover, they're still pumping money in in 2021, right? Yeah. But there comes a point where like the economy's doing well, you don't need to keep QE going, which is quantitative easing, where they keep pushing more money in, right? You can stop. You could just let's see what happens. Why do you keep pumping, right? So they kept pumping money into 2022. M2's still going up. And then they're like, oh, well, inflation's transient here. It's probably not going to keep going up. But if you keep pumping M2, it's going to go up.
Yes.
It's just going to. That's what happens. There's more money, prices go up. That's how it works. It's just economics 101, right? So I don't agree with them keeping going with pumping M2. And that's why we got into this situation. So now they try to tighten it up. But the problem is the money's out there. You can't pull it back easily. Okay. It's hard to do. So they are tightening a little bit, but there's only so much they can do. So the only other thing they can do is raise rates. And that's what's been happening.
And so raising rates, what does that do exactly, right?
So that does a couple things. It causes a liquidity crunch, right? Because now your long-term bonds and treasuries are worth less.
Yeah.
Great,
Right, cool. Thanks. So like my safe money is no longer safe anymore.
Yeah, it's not worth as much, that's for sure.
Yeah. And when because like the 30-year bond, it only fluctuates like 2-3% sometimes, right? But people in Bitcoin world are like, oh, that's nothing. What is it? On a massive scale, when you have $210 billion in assets under management and you have debtors that comes in from people putting cash in your bank, 3% of $210 billion is a lot of money. And so if you can't come up with that, you're screwed. You know what I mean? And so it's like they were trying to raise what, 2 billion? How much were they trying to raise?
I don't remember. Yeah. But it was a lot.
Yeah. So it's like if you're trying to raise 2 billion, that's only 1% of their assets under management. So imagine it going down 3% and they couldn't even raise 1%. You know what I mean? So it's like it's a dangerous world we live in, And so it's oh my God.
Yeah. So when you really take a look at the macroeconomics and get an idea of the full picture, it makes a lot of sense how we got here. It just does. It all makes sense. And it's very easy to follow the money trail and how things, just evolve.
It's always easy looking back at
this is
where we messed up.
Yeah.
It's like, wait. You're telling me that if we print $5 trillion and just give it away, we won't have inflation.
So the thing is, the government also needs to be a little bit careful with how much debt they push out there and what the rates are, because the treasuries are based off of the federal funds rate, right? Yeah. So now you got treasuries that are paying 4%, 5%, long term, 10-year, and the government's still issuing them because we got $31 trillion in debt or whatever, right? Yeah. Now, the thing is, here's the dirty little secret.
Okay.
The inflation actually helps the government.
Yeah.
Because it erodes the national debt over time. Yeah. A lot of people don't know that. That's like one of the dirty little secrets of the U.S. is that it's actually a good thing. It erodes the national debt. So
I feel like that's why geopolitical.
It kind of benefits them to have inflation high. Now it hurts the economy, so they bring up the rates, but now it puts even more pressure on the servicing of that debt, because now you're bringing in these 10-year, 20-year, 30-year bonds that are paying 4.5%, and when inflation comes back down to 2%, it goes the other way. Now that it's getting worse for you, right? Yes. So you don't want to do that either. So it's constantly a balance for the government to really keep things kosher,
And that's what's interesting to me is like, all right, so right now the only thing anyone talking about is inflation and hiking interest rates, and then job reports because the economy's strong, right? And so how you were talking about, you're like, hey, they're just pumping in so much money. We got to keep pumping it in, got to keep pumping it in, got to keep pumping it in. Is that kind of, and you're like, why don't you just stop and then see how it goes for a little bit? Stop QE. All right. So quantitative easing, right? So right now we are doing QT, right? Quantitative tightening, right? And so, and they're talking about ramping it up even more. Is there how you were like, hey, let's just stop for a second and let's wait it out a little bit? when do we get to that point with like, hey, let's slow it down? Like, I know that inflation is still high, but this quantitative tightening is causing banks to fail. And that's not good either, because then you have to bail out potentially these banks, or you create a systemic failure from this bank and wipe out billions of dollars from the people. So you're hurting the people and you're benefiting the government. At some point, like the balancing act that you have to say, like, when does that stop? Or when do we at least put a pin in it and say, all right, maybe we're raising interest rates too fast. Maybe we are doing quantitative tightening too hard. What do you think about that?
So I think every time you raise the interest rate, it's really a delay of like 12 months before you see the full ramifications of that change, right? Mm-hmm. So they're still pushing quarter points, and they were doing 3/4 points before that. Yeah. We're not going to see the full effects of it until the end of this year, you know, if not later, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the fact that inflation is coming down, core, you know, the core isn't as good as the full inflation, but it is still coming down, at least over the past 6 months, and probably will continue to do so, even if they flat the rates for 6 months, mm-hmm. which they're probably not going to do. I think they're probably going to go 1/4 point, maybe even more, because, you know, the economy is strong enough where they can keep pushing it, and I think that's what they're ultimately going to do over the next few Fed meetings. Not financial advice by any means, but
we're just talking about it.
It just seems like that's where they're going, you know. But the day they start to flat and they start to change their stance to more of like a dovish, where it's like, we actually want to start bringing the rate, we might want to start bringing the rates back down to a more acceptable rate where you're not getting mortgages for 8%, you might be getting it for 5%, you know, more of a reasonable rate. It could be 2024, 2025, but at that time, also, you're getting the Bitcoin happening. Smart contracts will be live on Radix. It could be a perfect storm for really, you know, taking it to the next level. Yeah.
Yo, Elon's sending people. I mean, we're sending people to the moon, literally, in 2024. Like, so, like, you know what I mean? I mean, I feel like the narrative could be cool. We're going to the moon, baby. Let's do it. You know what I mean? Like, hopefully by then it's turning around, right? And so I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about, because I've been talking about this for a while, like how people are like, oh, the economy's great. I'm like, we have not even seen what the impacts are going to be. I still think it could get worse before it gets better. And which is unfortunate, because it hurts a lot of people. You know what I mean? I mean, look at Radix. Radix just laid off 25% of its workforce, right? Which is unfortunate, but it's just like, it's necessary potentially to continue going through the runway. Like, people are starting to tighten down the hatches. You know what I mean? I mean, Meta just now announced another 13% layoff of their entire workforce. And that's Meta. I mean, partially that's because TikTok's taking all their users, but in that sense, it's kind of crazy the way it's unfolding.
So companies, especially tech companies, are going into survival mode. Mm-hmm. It's, how do we survive until we get into a better economic environment? Mm-hmm. So you have to agree with them with these layoffs. I mean, it's terrible because people are losing their jobs, hurts the economy. But at the same time, it's like, would you rather see them go out of business? Obviously not. You know, that you want to see these, especially big companies, like, you can't be having them go out of business. I mean, that would, you know,
you're talking about too big to fail. If someone like, if Meta goes out of business and just loses everything, no one can use Instagram anymore, people will lose their minds.
Yeah. Then we'd really have a crisis on
No, Instagram? What? Damn you, freaking Mark. I thought you just buy us back. You have all the money. Yeah. People would really lose it then, and that would not be good. So I mean, it's like you said, it's just this continued balance, you know?
Yeah.
Jeez. It's an interesting world that we're living in right now. It's definitely different than what it was 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, you know? And so, I mean, unfortunately, the pandemic changed the whole game, right? Everyone's just sitting there cruising. Interest rates are great. Like, they're rising them steadily. The economy's going well. And then all of a sudden you shut down the economy, right? And so, like, and that's one of the things that I get, but I was also so frustrated with that they injected all this money because they literally, and I didn't see a penny of it. So it's like, I don't know if I can on that front, but like I literally got $0 for the government. Yeah. And so it's just like, great, thanks, man. You know what I mean? Everyone else is doing just fine. Like some of my clients are getting all these PPP loans and SBA loans and all this stuff that they're not going to have to pay back. And so it's like, and then they just spend it all willy-nilly, you know what I mean? And it's just like, oh, man. And so it created the ripe environment for all of this to happen. And so it's absolutely kind of nuts with what's really occurring.
Yeah, and honestly, like the way technology is moving, we're not that far away from, general AI, robots. Like robots could really start coming into the workforce and taking a lot of jobs away, which would actually push us into a deflationary environment where wages really start coming down a lot.
Expand upon that.
Which is kind of something that we need with the baby boomers that are going into retirement and coming out of the workforce, and with the population growth where it is in the U.S. There's not really a lot of people coming into the workforce, so you really do need some type of deflationary thing to bring down those higher wages, because there's just not enough people in the country to work these jobs. I mean, that's what's happening. That's what we're seeing, and that's one of the reasons. That's another reason why inflation is high.
That's crazy. And isn't Trump talking about now paying people to have babies or something? Like, isn't that what it was? Like his idea now is like it's like, hey, let's pay people to have babies because we need a larger workforce because people are living longer, right? Like people, retirement age forever has been what, 65? But all the 65-year-old retirees were dying at like 76 and 80. Now they're living to 90, 98, 100.
Oh, yeah.
Even longer than that. And so it's like the retirement age hasn't gotten higher, but your life expectancy has, right? And so all these people that are like, I'm good, I'm retiring.
You run out of money.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And so it's crazy. So it's a wild concept. So you as a startup founder, what is like your biggest obstacle? How do you see this moving forward? I sent you the pre-questionnaire. You mentioned something like how are you going to try and make Astrolescent sustainable for the long period of time?
So a big thing, especially in the startup stage, actually probably the most important thing is, being able to raise funding. And that's something that's just not really in the cards for especially small startups. Like I don't even think VCs would allow us to do a pitch because we're just too small. Radix is too small. It would be very hard. So we're really just bootstrapping the company, and that's a very difficult thing when you're already putting a lot of time in. You're sinking a ton of money into it. You have a full-time job. This is the second full-time job. It's but I see the vision where like we're going to work with other projects on Radix to make Radix a great place for DeFi, where people are going to come here because it's easy to use, it's safe to use. They're not going to have to worry about their seed phrases getting lost because you have these these new smart accounts, and you have different types of push notifications, and there's so much more user interface here than you can do on Ethereum that I think ultimately it will catch fire. But we need smart contracts. We need to get the builders building. Like once Babylon goes live, we're going to try to get the stablecoin up quick. We got to get the DEXs up like OC, Caviar. We got to get their products up. And then we got to get all of the products working together symbiotically. And it's very important for each project to work with each other and find out different ways you can partner up and work together to bring out these more complex products.
It's consolidation.
Yeah. So I mean, that's why we partner with DeFi Plaza, because Timon's on both teams, but also because like we don't want to spend all our effort doing the DEX as well as the DEXAG as well as the stablecoin. We want to kind of target our development towards things that are either harder to do or no one else is doing. We don't want a lot of overlap, and what we'd like to do is make it into like a widget where like other projects can just import that widget like on Coinbase. It's like a buy sell convert type of thing.
What exactly is a widget?
A widget is just something you can import into a web application that like runs separately. So it'll run through our APIs, but the user will just see a widget on whatever website they're at.
Okay.
So
go for it, sir.
So we'll be able to bring a fiat on and off ramp to multiple other projects within the ecosystem as well. And that's really something we're trying to proliferate so that there's really frictionless access anywhere on Radix.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it makes sense because, and so I'm trying to think because so we just, I'm project founder. Most people know that Buff Wild. Yep. We merged with Radix Eco to form an entity called Crew Labs, right? And so Crew Labs has worked together. Our devs worked with Radix Ecos, and we created this marketplace, which actually just launched yesterday for NFTs. And we actually incorporated Caviar's API onto our platform, so you can actually swap on the NFT platform that we have without going to different websites. You know what I mean? And so that's an example of would that be a widget in an API? How does that work exactly?
Yeah, so you would import the widget and it would just show up when you get to the right step. So you have to do some type of KYC process once you get to the widget. But, let's say you pass, or let's say you are already KYC verified, right? Then you could just, connect your bank account and start a transfer, and then you could go anywhere you want. And we would facilitate all those things through, one of our partner websites. Like DeFi Plaza. You go to DeFi Plaza, you want to do a fiat on off ramp, we would provide that service on their website.
Yeah, it's important. You know what I mean? Because when did you guys team up with them? I remember the announcement. How long ago was that?
We've been working together for a long time.
Okay.
So like when we designed our own CDEX, DeFi Plaza also wanted to design theirs. So a lot of the code is very similar between the two. Mm-hmm. So that's really when we started working together there. And then we're like, well, how can we get more value out of this partnership? And that's when we started announcing. And then they're going to do the pairwise pools to get us started on network. We're going to bootstrap that initial liquidity so you can go to USDA, you can go anywhere on Radix through our DexAg. So that's the plan.
So how do you so one of the grant winners, Alpha Dex, right? You remember them?
Yep.
Well, how do they play into that factor, right? Because they're building like an actual order book, right? Is that something Astrolescent is going to be, since you guys are an aggregator, is that something that it'll go through as well, or does that only do liquidity pools? How does that work and fit into like the ecosystem?
Yeah, we should be able to easily route through Alpha Dex. Shouldn't be a problem. So I have also been working on an open source architecture for Scripto so that when developers design these smart contracts, they can work seamlessly with each other. Mm-hmm. And it's like an open source standard. So it's like, these are our recommendations for you to write into the contract so that when other developers want to integrate your smart contract, it's easy to do. There's enough methods in there that they can know how it works and things like that, right? And the documentation is good. So I just passed that along to Jazzer. He's going to add his recommendations, and we need to get buy-in from the greater community for, DEXs, but not just DEXs, like DAO and voting protocols or LP AGs or, all kinds of different smart contracts. And it's just like a generalized standard. It's like, this is what we think is the best way to do the design. And then it should, like, each contract can interface with each other much easier than it is on Ethereum when there's, everything's willy-nilly.
Yeah. And so speaking of that, like, as someone who, you're basically almost like a full stack dev at this point with all the languages that that we were talking about earlier. Is Scripto really all that's cracked up to be? I don't know jack shit about coding. Like, I took Harvard's 101 CS class, and I was just messing around with that like cat thing where you just like kind of pull like basically coding for children. And I made like a little video with like different images where it's just like moving around, right? So that's my pretty much understanding. I understand how a lot of it works, but like, how does Scripto actually work with Rust and everything? And why is this? Because people are so big on it. Why is Scripto so important? And how does it really fit into the broader world and broader ecosystem of like coding languages?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because for the non-developers out there, they're like, oh, Scripto is great, but I don't really understand what it does any better than Solidity, for example, right? The Ethereum language. So I haven't written anything in Solidity, so I can't really speak to it exactly, right? But I know that there aren't native assets, so they need to code in all the things that a token needs. So like that's why they have the ERC standards, right?
Yeah.
And that gives the tokens some laws that they have to abide by, right? So there's some structure there, right? But on Scripto, it's all built into the Scripto library, so you don't really need to follow a standard because it's already built into the Radix engine itself. So when you create a vault or you create a bucket, it has methods built into it that it can only do certain things, right? You can only do so much. You can't like double mint. There's like protection mechanisms built in from a protocol level, and that's what gives it.
So why is that important with this native assets, right? Because that's one thing that's triggering in my brain. So a native asset is the token, right? So like an example, like Astrolescent token, right? That's a native asset. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then so to create a token like the ERC tokens on Ethereum, you have to actually physically draft a smart contract or code a smart contract. Is that correct?
I believe so, but I'm not a Solidity
Sure. But
person.
basic understanding layman.
I think so.
Okay.
So. Yeah,
Okay,
that's
cool.
a good way to put it. Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas like on Radix, if you want to create a token, it's just like create with initial supply, and you pass it a few arguments, and you have something, and then you could put in access control for depositing, withdrawing, and there's all types of different rules that you can bake into these tokens that you can't do on other networks. And that's really what gives it so much power. It's like the sky's the limit with what you can do with Scripto. And I'm probably not even doing it justice because I'm not really like.
You're fine. I mean, hey, you know more than me. And I would just want to sometimes, like, because I can talk to like Beam, Beam from Radlock, super great guy. And he is a wizard. You know what I mean? And so, and he just understands this stuff on such a technical level that sometimes the hierarchy level, it's like he's talking about buckets and vaults and moving the vault from the bucket and the bucket from the vault and all these on-base native assets, talking to someone who is more a little bit on my level, since you know what you're talking about, not on my level. I mean, you are Beam. I don't know your guys' strategies, but like Beam, as understand it, is a genius in terms of coding and understanding that, and the way he explains is wild. And then here you are, and then here I am. You know what I mean? So like the levels of understanding. So like, and I know more than the average person, a lot more. And then there's these people down here, and then there's these people who can't even get into Web3, right? And so we're talking about these things because when you said native assets, and I was like, okay, I keep hearing this, and I think I know what it is, but the way you just explained it makes so much sense in a way that Beam necessarily couldn't put it to me, because you're still trying to figure it out yourself, and I'm still trying to figure out what the fuck a vault is. You know what I mean? Like. And he's just like, oh, yeah, the vault. And then you take the bucket. And I'm like, okay, it makes sense. You're storing your tokens here and the bucket moves them all. You know what I mean? And so it makes perfect sense. But I'm still trying to figure it out. So it's perfect. So I think it's great. You know what I mean? You're doing fine.
So that's great. Yeah. I mean, it's really important to, have a, fundamental understanding of exactly what's going on. Because, you want Radix to do great and things like that. But when people ask those difficult questions, you want to give them, some substance and be able to explain it to them well enough, But
I mean, I just learned. Go.
So there's one thing, it's kind of related, but so I watched Radfi with my wife.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And she actually thought they did a great job. And I agree with them. They did a great job.
Yeah.
But she was like, how do you like pitch this to someone that like they can come in and do all this stuff? And I was like, I don't really know to like, how do you bring someone who knows like nothing of this, right? Like totally traditional finance, never done anything Web3 or crypto before. How do you bring someone like that in and show them that like this is a better way to do things? And I'm like, I actually think that's a great question. It's hard to do that.
Yeah.
Because like they need some base knowledge to it takes time to build up to Web3 because it's so complicated comparatively, you know.
Oh, I completely agree. Completely agree. And that's why I just learned something, right? And so that has been my thing this whole time. Because like my job, I'm not a developer, so I can't build on the network. I can help people build and I can lead and put money into building. But my job is talking to people, getting people to use this shit. I'm a salesman. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so like I'm out here, I'm like, hey, Radix, come on, this stuff's awesome. And half the time, so I would always ask Dan, I'm like, Dan, Cassandra, Cassie, blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool, man. No one cares who isn't under that thing. But why does this work? Dan, what do I point to on Cassandra? What's important? And he's always like, Twitter. I can build Twitter on it. And then as soon as he said he could build Twitter on it, I was like, now I understand why it's important. And then I asked Dan follow-up questions like, Dan, if you're building Twitter on Cassandra, where's this data being stored? And then he's like, oh, well, you can actually store bits of data on chain. It would actually be functional to store the Twitter entire data set on chain for Twitter. And I'm just like, because like I'm building a project and half of our stuff is like, hey, where are we storing the data for the images of our NFTs? So where are we storing the data for the video game that we created, right? And so that's a lot of it. And then so now I'm starting to realize, I'm like, oh my God, I'm really starting to understand, because I am a layperson. I do understand this stuff. But it's like, why is this important? And so now you taught me something where like that I could really understand why it is more important. It's something I've been lacking, is a native asset, right? It's like, yo, hey, they're native on the layer 1 chain that is different than Ethereum. And it is so much more safer. It's so much more secure. It's easier. It's cheaper. It's more efficient, right? And so that is, because I've been trying to figure out, it's like, I know everyone's saying, I trust Dan because the guy's a genius. And everyone's saying, yo, we need to, like, Radix is the best. And I'm trying to learn how to sell it to all these other people. You know what I mean? And so that's why I love talking to people like you. And that's why I do this, so that I can go. So I do that. Siri, no one's talking to you, man.
I think it's very important to be able to take complex topics and break them down so that a layperson can digest them and at least have a basic understanding of what's going on. Because how much of an understanding do you really have in like traditional markets? Like not that much, but I don't think that should be the precedent. Like we can do something better than that with Web3, and we can explain it more and be more transparent. And I think that's how you build trust, is like the transparency and showing like, this is what we're doing with, these are all the steps, and this is where everything's going, and this is what we have in like our proof of reserves or something like that, right? You know, just building that trust with the community is something you can easily do on Web3, and that's what we're trying to do.
I agree. And honestly, that's why I was very bullish after Radify, because I did not really know what to expect. Like, so the wallet, right? You know how you tell people, you don't tell anyone anything. You just tell them, hey, use this. Okay. Why? Because it's easy and it's awesome. You know why Apple dominated? Was because they made the phone so easy to use,
right,
flawlessly, that you can just, like keyboards, because before you had keyboards and people use computers, so you can just give this thing to your grandmother, right? And that's always the standard. Hey, use this, right? Give this thing to your grandmother. She can use it flawlessly. Like my wife's grandmother, she's an old crazy woman who hasn't left her house in 30 years, and you got her an iPad. She's like, oh, I know how to use an iPad. This is easy. It's a click, 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 click. You know what I mean? And they just made it the easiest things in the world. And you just give it to them. They don't know they need it until they start using it. And then they're like, they can't get enough, right? And so that's why I was excited about RadFi and about the wallet design, is because it's not there yet, because we need Babylon and we need the wallet live so we can start showing people like, hey, use this thing. Use this thing. You can have the best technology in the world, but if no one uses it, it doesn't matter. And right now, the reason why it's hard to explain to people why Radix is important, because it's not easy to onboard, and not a lot of people have an easy use. You want Ethereum? Go on Coinbase, buy Ethereum, and then send it to this, and then have your NFTs. Cool. You know what I mean? And so we're almost there. We're almost there. Yeah. We just got to keep plugging along.
So you reminded me of a quote by Henry Ford, right?
Okay.
You know, back when Henry Ford was inventing cars, he said, when I asked people what they would have wanted in, you know, a transportation vehicle, they would have said faster horses.
Faster horses.
But they don't even know because it doesn't exist yet.
Yes.
Right. So you have to have the vision that, like, if you can create something that really facilitates like financial, like, transactions and makes your life easier, and it's easy to use and it's intuitive and it's safe, if you can do all these things in one product, and grandma can use it, right?
Yep, grandma can use it.
Then you really have a winner, and I think it will ultimately catch on. But like you said, you still need to sell the product a little bit. You got to go out there, you got to market it, you got to get the partnerships going, you got to do all these things. But at the same time, we got to get the product out there first, right?
Yeah. We have to build the engine before. We're still running horses right now. You know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. We need the freaking engine. You know what I mean? Like, I had this idea for writing an article about the little engine that could, and label it Radix, the little engine that could. You know that old story, fairy tale story? And so I still might write it, but we're waiting for the engine. You know what I mean? And so it's like, it is a long-term play, and that's what a lot of people on Radix still do not understand. I mean, they do, most people, but like it coming in and out is that it, like you said, it could be shaping up to be the storm of storms for,
in a good way.
Yes,
in a good way.
You know what I mean? Like,
yes, it's a perfect storm in a good way.
In a good way, right? Like, and so it's exciting, you know, like, but it is going to be long term. I mean, it's still a year and a half, and people, it's like, hey, let's consolidate, let's get our stuff, keep building, get everything out there, and keep moving forward, you know. And so we're close. We are close. We are on the precipice of Babylon getting real smart contracts, and then the Shein upgrade is really all of everything what really matters, right? And so it's gonna be interesting to see.
I like when people say that, like, you know, for Babylon we can only do 50 transactions a second, and it's like, we don't need Xi'an if we're not even getting to 50. So like, we want to like get to 50 so that, like, it would be a good problem to have if like so many people are using the network that we're using all 50 TPS. You know what I mean? So that's where we want to get to before we release Xi'an. So
yes, 100%. But to get there, we need people, and right now it's like, okay, there aren't even a lot of people to get right now. You know what I mean? I mean, like, I was talking to people at ETH Denver, and everyone at ETH Denver is all builders. You know what I mean? All these people, like, there's a massive pullback from technology a little bit. Not technology, but being online currently.
Yeah.
After the pandemic and after people were just flooded with all this stuff, they're kind of getting a little bit back to their roots, in my opinion. And it's not going to last forever. I mean, let's be real. Like, but no one's talking about living in the metaverse right now. You know, like, everyone's like, yeah, there's a war going on in Ukraine. There's spy balloons in China. I can't think about living in the metaverse, right? But still out there, and it's still coming around, right? And so once these macro environments start to change, which I hope they do over the next year and a half, right? And it starts swinging on the upswing, because everything ends during the bull market, everyone thinks the bull market's never going to end. It's going to go forever, right? And then when you're in a bear market, which we are, and on the precipice of a recession, in my opinion, I think we're pretty much at one, and it could get a little worse, but everyone thinks it's going to last forever, but it won't. You know what I mean? This stuff's all cyclical. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Study history, you can predict the future, right? And so it's like, how long is this thing really going to last? And so I've been saying for a while, Q3, Q4, 2024. I'm starting to think maybe even 2025 a little bit, but for the real upswing on it. But it's not too far away, and we're still plugging away at it.
We're halfway there.
We're halfway there. I would agree. We're halfway there.
Yeah.
Good. But yo, hey, this has been amazing so far. We're sitting at about an hour and 15. One thing I like to ask people towards the end, if you have one message that you can kind of relay to the listeners that they could take away from this conversation, you hope that they really kind of grasp, what would it be? It can be anything, philosophical, something about your project, whatever you want. Like, what would you like them to know?
So I tend to pride myself on not really thinking the same way that I would say maybe most people think. You know, you have to have a top level system. How is the whole thing going to come together? And everything we're trying to do here is for that greater vision of bringing Radix to the masses and facilitating people to come on and off very easily. That's really where everyone's head should be at. So anybody in the community who's technical, build something, go out there, build a product, you know. Who cares if it doesn't work or you need help? Like, ask people to help, you know, get the teams, the building to get, you know, because the more people that are doing it, the more interesting products that are come out. You know, the more people that are going to use it. It's going to be like a melting pot of like a technology like explosion, right? You know, I mean, the sky's the limit. You can do everything you need to do with Scripto. Get out there and do something, you know.
I like it. That's the way to do it. I love that. I'm right on par with you on that. I think it's a great message to have. Just go and do the thing. And and you just learn along the way. If it's not perfect immediately, I mean, just fix it, man. You know what I mean? Like,
it's so funny. It's so funny you say that, because like when I first started this project in the summer, I was, you know, writing code every day, and we would go for walks with my wife and my son. We would just go for walks because, you know, it was beautiful summer this summer. It was every day was sunny. It was like 85 every day. We'd go for walks every day, and every walk I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm at a point I don't know what to do. I really don't know what to do. And then like the next day, you know, you think about it, sleep on it, and you keep going. You find a solution. Just keep working through it. You'll figure it out. If you spend enough time, if you talk to enough people, you will figure it out. And that's like something important. Even when it seems like it's impossible, you're at the bottom of a mountain. You don't know how high it is, right? Yeah. But you're not going to know until you start, you know, going up and iterating through it, and you know, that whole thing. So that's my message.
How do you eat an elephant? How do you eat an elephant?
Right.
One bite at a time.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you just got to do it, you know? And so I completely agree. It's something that you just got to keep moving forward. Don't give up. Just keep building. You get better. It's experience. You know what I mean? It's experience. And so it's good. That's a good message. So, Mike, honest to God, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me. Everyone, check them out. Astrolescent. They've got a stablecoin coming on. Radix already have an aggregator that you can use and trade on. It's really super efficient. Check them out. They're super cool. Mike, thank you so much. I'll have to have you back on the show sometime towards closer to Babylon. Sound good?
Sure. Yeah.
Perfect, man.
I like it. One.
Have a good one, guys. Talk to you real soon.
Hope you all enjoyed the show. Please help support my channel by smashing the like button and hitting subscribe. Have a great day, and see you next time on Towards the Storm.